Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Stress Test. We're so excited to have with us Pete Hiskey, who I met on a golf trip, actually.
Which you don't take very many, although
I don't.
You golf a lot.
No, I do golf a lot, but I don't take any golf trips, and this was really special. We met in Myrtle Beach, and he's an incredible guy. In fact, he names golf as his first language and English as his second language. So you're going to love getting to know Pete today. He's a family man. He's been married almost 40 years, has 5 kids, 10 grandkids. He's been in ministry for so long. I will get to hear it from him, but just incredible. All ministers all over the world in over 200 countries where golf is played. They just came back from Cuba in their latest trip and internationally. But I really love not just his ministry, Mulligan Ministry, but I love the fact that our connection actually happened around, we were eating dinner.
Around stress.
Around
right?
stress.
Is what you're going to say?
And we actually
stress.
shared our rest story, not our stress story. So welcome to Stress Test. Pete, thank you so much for being here.
Well, it's so great to be here with you all and to learn with you. I've enjoyed listening and watching the podcast episodes, and hopefully I can make a little contribution to those who've gone through what I've gone through and what you've gone through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was just, we really connected over that dinner. That first night, God, I think, placed me right across from you, getting to hear a little bit about your story and kind of walk us through a little bit of your journey, because I was first, of course, mesmerized by, he's in golf. He's on the PGA Tour, not as a competitor, but as a missionary. And you are a competitor, by the way. He's an amazing golfer. But tell us a little bit how in the world you ended up being the dream job of dream jobs for everybody who loves golf, like getting to go on the tour and travel. How did that happen? I know that wasn't by accident.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking me to share some of my story. And, I think anybody asked that, you feel like you need to go almost back to the day you were born, the family you were born in. I was born into a real golf family. My grandfather built golf courses for a living out in Idaho. And my dad and my 2 uncles were both, NCAA champions in the 50s,
Wow.
as well as professional golfers. Both my dad and my uncle played on the PGA Tour. So a lot of what I grew up with was just golf is a norm. It's like you were saying, that's the language I understood. Every job I've pretty much had in my life has been connected with golf, from cutting greens to raking bunkers to working in a golf shop, picking up golf balls. Because my dad was a golf professional and also a pastor. So, somewhat I'm the proverbial apple that didn't fall far from the tree with my father. And we're Marylanders. I've lived here since I was a little kid. Played golf almost all my life. My brother was a scholarship player at University of Maryland. My sister, Duke University, and I was at James Madison University, played golf for their team there. When I was growing up, my dad was an early Campus Crusade staff worker. And shortly after that, he got invited to come to the University of Maryland. So we moved to when I was just a little kid, and he started combining golf and ministry work together along with university work. So I kind of saw that growing up. We lived in a house. It was a little bit, if any of our listeners are familiar with L'Abri Fellowship in Switzerland, Francis Schaeffer, my parents were greatly affected by their ministry. And so we had a house like that growing up. We had, 3-hour dinners every night, and between 4 and 6 students living in our house with us. It was a big property at the campus there at University of Maryland. but how does that some of that connect with my story of rest and where I went to? It's probably the next thing because I grew up with I would say a very negative view of Sunday.
Mm.
We always had to go to church. We always had to memorize the verses and the Westminster Confession, and there was a lot of rules. And growing up, I just wanted to go play football or golf on Sunday.
Right.
But we'd go visit old folks' homes, and we visit the prisons and go to 2 services, and maybe go to different churches. And so Sunday was like, this had kind of a negative connotation, to me. And that, of course, that affected my own family when my wife and I started having children and started deciding, how do we raise these kids and how does church affect that? And, I probably swung the pendulum a little hard the other way. And I kind of didn't have I would say when I discussed with my children these days, I probably didn't portray the organized Sunday morning church in a very positive light. I just didn't, and I probably told them, some things I'd like to take back now. But I think my wife and I, who came to a kind of a decent balance, probably by the time they were, high schoolers, middle schoolers, that kind of thing. We were involved in church. We still went. It was just a part of life. For me, I was taught that church is 168 hours a week. It's every hour, every day, and then a couple hours you go to a building. So but I didn't even give much credence to that 2 hours. It's kind of my self-confession. I portrayed that to my kids that way. So it might come as a surprise, that at some point in my life I became a pastor.
Right. Well, I think that's when that's when your story took a turn for me. I was so enthralled with, wow, golf. And then you were like, yeah, and I've been a pastor and it was the most stressful year of my life. I was like, what? Tell me about that. How in the world did that end up happening?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because back when I was in my mid-20s, right after I became married, we were attending a local church in Maryland, and our pastor, he was just a good friend of mine, and asked me to come up one day to help with the baptism. And I was up there, and I just thought, man, this is so cool. Baptism. Well, baptism is cool.
Yes.
But I felt very comfortable up there. And then he asked me, several months later to help serve communion. And I thought, this is great. Communion is awesome, and to see people take, participate in the Lord's Supper. This is really cool. So anyway, he just encouraged me to be open to, maybe there's something here for you. And he basically got me to enroll in seminary. And I did this part-time for 7 years. Well, I was a rep with a golf company at the time. So I was selling golf equipment, playing golf. But every evening I was studying to just prepare myself. I'm a pretty good trainer of myself. Looking to mentors, people I could learn from. And so I just thought it'd be good to do. Having no idea in the future that would be a need. So I finished seminary when I was 31, and I was ordained, interestingly enough, in a group called the Evangelical Church Alliance, which Billy Graham was associated with, and with two of our PGA Tour chaplains at the time. So they're the ones who laid their hands on me, and were friends of ours here in Maryland, and I loved what they did. Again, having no idea, that when I'd be closer to 50, I'd actually take a job at a church.
Right.
So I worked as a sales rep for 24 years, and my big shift came in 2003 when my wife and I sensed that God was asking me to leave the sales job and kind of pursue opportunities with helping on the PGA Tour. These men that I just mentioned who laid their hands on me were retiring or beginning their next phase of the journey, and as well as some opportunities around the world. I've always had kind of a mission oriented heart, and even when I was in the sales business, I would do these trips around the world to visit golf communities in China, Japan, Australia. I love to travel, and I love to integrate my language, with these friends. So when that happened, it was just interesting because through a long series of circumstances, which I won't go into, God. The only thing I could say is He just pushed me into a corner where it was obvious that I should become a pastor at this church. There's no other way to say it. Like, I kept saying, "You got to be kidding, God! Like, there's no way. I don't. I'm not the right kind of person. Not from a skill set, but I just this can be really difficult for me to do." But it basically got to the point where my closest friends that I was walking with, people in our ministry, they're like, "He's calling you to do this." And
Wow.
I was literally Jane to the reluctant convert to become a pastor.
Sure.
What did you think? What did you think you needed to have, personality wise or skill wise? What were the roadblocks in your mind to becoming a pastor?
Well, one of it was kind of embarrassing. It's like, what do people think about me?
No, that's not embarrassing. That's legit.
I mean, and I was thinking like, every Sunday morning I got to be there.
Yeah.
All these. I mean, I'm like, oh man, I got to be on call, man. Like,
yeah, you got to give up your weekend.
2 weeks. That's a big commitment.
Right.
What about my golf trips?
That's high level. There was all these other levels.
Sure.
Like what? How can this possibly be the most effective use of my time? Like, oh my God, like, So anyway, I accepted the call, and it was, the role I was in. I was a pastor over a small group and leadership, and the body I was in was growing. So I really enjoyed working with the leaders. We didn't have a church building, so that, we were at a high school. So some of that resonated with me a little bit more. Although we were in the process of building a big place, which is part of the story, that affected me quite a bit. Massive growth at the time. For some of you church leader people out there, like when you build a building, I mean, you just experience growth because it's new and people show up. And so it overwhelmed me.
And you experienced a lot of stress from the building project as well as the growth.
Oh yeah. Having a regular office was difficult. I never had a boss. In my life. I had a regional sales manager that kind of like, would come in every once in a while, but I really didn't have a place that, now needed to be used. Right. Like it needed it, instead of us going out, which is kind of more of my natural motif. It was like bringing people in, and it was a challenge for me. And the place kept growing, which is great. It's hard to complain about growth, but I, started with leading like 10 small groups, and within 2 years it was about 70 groups, and so it was just to keep up with people, and we started doing hiring, and we had different people in leadership, and all of a sudden, the 4 or 5 guys that I was excited about
Mhm.
doing this with. We have, 15 pastors and meetings, and it's just to
All
me, it was like
administrative.
Yeah.
all, and went through what a lot of people go through, which is like, our pastor of family life took another job, and instead of hiring somebody like, hey, you'd be good with men, Pete, and you'd be good with this, and all of a sudden you're
You
doing all
experienced
this
the,
other stuff.
yeah, you
Yeah.
experienced the ministry addition of hats. Keep adding and
Oh,
adding
yeah.
and adding, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you're showing up for
Everything.
there's a lot of things I learned, that I, one of the, like you were asking me, what are some of the things I learned? One is I fought the wrong fights.
Mm.
Like it was just over something. I had to show up to sports map. Like I have all these other things going on, and I didn't fight the right fights of, I was just stupid and young. I mean, most of it, I just made some mistakes.
What were some of
But
the other things, Pete, you that really led? Because you described those years to me as some of the most stressful years you'd ever experienced, and we'll get to it later. Kind of the recovery process that led you to the rest. That was really the topic of our conversation later. But
Yeah.
I'm curious now in this part of the story, what were some of the key things and moments that made it that description, the most stressful years for you?
Yeah, and I think that is a good description of those 3 years. It's I call it like an extra master's degree, a 3-year program
Yeah.
where the first year was amazing, the second year was pretty good, and the third year was wasn't very good.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think when I look, part of that is like taking on more responsibility than I had. I didn't really have a good sense of boundaries. I have, a personality. It's like sort of like a savior complex that I feel like I can resolve anything, and yet I'm better this than other people. And I wasn't really good at saying no to anything. And of course, like when you're somebody's life is changing. It's 5:30 p.m. and you need to be getting home. I mean, this is conflict of time, and
Yeah.
I didn't choose very well. And then I think from a kind of a more developing a healthy rhythm of life perspective, I didn't really have any. Our policy when I was employed there was, you need to take a day off to recover. I would say it was to recover. It wasn't a day to like honor is precious and to delight in the Lord, to experience his rest and who he is and who you are and who we are. It was more of a day just to pass out. And even that day, frankly, I was compromised.
Yeah.
80% of the time. I mean, so, all that built up, I would liken those years to a bank account where I was at 100% when I started, probably the first year down to like 80. I was still good, 40, by mid second year, I was like at 0. I was barely breathing. My spiritual bank was less like done. I wasn't taking care of my own soul. I wasn't, my input coming in was so small. Even from our pastor, our worship team, I was distracted on Sunday mornings from receiving.
Mm-hmm.
My own personal time to like connect and learn was very small. And so, you can just tell where this is going, where a lot of people go. It's just like, middle second year, I'm done. I just quit. I'm resigning. I'm not getting any help on just, we need another pastor to help care for groups. I mean, I lead in this men's group, which is fantastic. I mean, it's an amazing group, but I'm just fried, don't feel like I have much to give. I'm begging God on the way to these meetings, like, say something. I mean, I got nothing about it, so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you end up
So
being an
I
airplane
quit.
looking for a crash landing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and, during that time too, my wife was dealing with her, you know, I wasn't able to care for her very well. And she lost her mom that year. It's 2009. We were experiencing some other close relational issues that were pressing on us that are not abnormal. I mean, it's just life.
Yeah.
But all that, kind of came to a head in 2009, which, we both look back and would title on, the year from hell. That's just what it felt like to us. And so I resigned. Had some elders come to me and convince me that that's not a good thing to do. So I came back for another month or two. Same thing happened. Went through the same cycle. Finally, by the third time, I really didn't even say anything. I just left. I left a nice note. I mean, I still look back at
Oh my gosh.
That's a clue that you're burned out.
Yeah, that is a big one. Yeah.
that's when you're
When you can't even have the conversation. I can't let you talk me out of this. I've got to just leave a note.
But it works. That's when they don't come back and talk you back into it.
Yeah.
He's out.
It wasn't.
I guess he is burned out.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
So you quit not knowing what you were going to do? Like you didn't have anything else?
Yeah, I did. At that time, I didn't have anything lined up. But my wife was so concerned about me, and we were together on important things. We loved each other. We wanted to make things work. I had 2 children still at home at that point, and realized that was not going very well either with them. Not like in the sense of losing them, but they had their own things going on. I just couldn't pay enough attention to. So it became pretty evident to me pretty quick that I needed to take care of my soul. My wife was like, more than anything, you need to get your soul back. You need whatever we got to do that. And
right.
So, it seemed a bit abrupt, but we just moved.
So did you take a time and rest then afterwards? You just went into like shutdown mode for a while? You moved and just
rested?
I
mean, it was intentional. It wasn't like, we're just checking out of the world and whatever. We were very specific about what we wanted to do. We encouraged, our church came back and said, you maybe just need a sabbatical and then you come back, which I never really heard what that was. I'd heard the name and the term, and that was actually sounding pretty good. The coming back part wasn't sounding good, but the leaving part was awesome.
Well, just like you described the most stressful years of your life to me, you also described this next year of recovery and rest as the greatest learning year of your life, because you went on a different journey. You went on a journey to find rest. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So we decided, we had a friend loan us their place down in Florida, and we moved down to Florida. I didn't know how long we would stay there. I wasn't really sure. We decided to homeschool our last 2 kids, and I disconnected my phone. I didn't have a phone. I had no phone number, no way to get in touch with me. My wife did for the kids. I disconnected my email. Didn't use email for 4 months. That's how long we were gone for. That's about how long it took me to just feel a sense of like life is good again, that he loves me. He's proud of me. He desires to breathe his life through me. And just get connected. I mean, the first couple weeks were like just like rehab of just sitting on a beach and like speak to me.
Mhm.
And I really, frankly, wouldn't leave until that happened. And
Wow.
that slowly came faster to me. Went from like 4 hours to 2 hours to like into his presence again.
Mhm.
And so that was a few months, honestly, to get my spiritual bank back, to really
Mhm.
open the scriptures and like they began to speak to me again, to feel like I'm
Mhm.
connecting with his desire for us, that began to sense like, hey, I have something good for you coming up.
Mhm.
Just trust me. I was like, okay, don't worry. I got you. Keep seeking first my kingdom. I'll take care of your food, your shelter, your clothing. So that was very reassuring. Special time with my two children down there, just to have time with them, with my wife. And I learned some really good lessons at that time that were such a gift to me leaving. That a couple of them I would share with you is, I grew up in this area, Washington, the greater Washington, D.C. area. And I realized that ambition is a huge word here,
Mhm.
politically, but also in the spiritual world. Like pastors and leaders come here because they are driven, very strong A types. The metaphor that God gave me during that time was the speed limit. He said, the speed limit around the DC Beltway is 60.
Mhm.
I think it was 60 at the time. Might even been 55. But people drive 75 miles an hour here.
Mhm.
And if you don't drive that fast, you're going to get destroyed. I mean, it's not
Right.
it's not breaking, it's
not
breaking the
safe.
law, right? But it's
Right.
also, you're going so fast
Self-preservation.
Yeah.
that you don't have time to like respond and think. And,
Mhm.
I moved when I was in Fort Lauderdale, the speed limit was 40 and people were driving 30. I mean, right? I mean, I'm like, first week, I'm like laying on the
Painful.
horn, man, like move, But I realized that was much healthier. I was like, man, I'd never even thought about this because I've never lived anywhere else.
Yeah.
I've never spent time thinking about that, at all in my life. So I didn't really ever think about it. But that was a good picture for me. And I just said, if I need to come back and live here, I just have to be okay with going the normal speed limit, which, some people even in my neighborhood are like, get moving, Pete. You got to, but I do really actually try to like drive slow. I mean, it sounds funny. I do actually try to drive slow. And I felt like that was a really good, metaphor in my life, good picture that we got. I had to be okay. I think one of the things if I was going to come back and actually live here, I had to be okay with people thinking I hate to use the word slacker because that sounds so bad, but if people thought, I wasn't going 100 miles an hour or doing everything possible, I just have to be okay with them saying, oh, that's just Pete. Because rest is never celebrated, it's not, hey, that person, that guy goes at a healthy pace of life. I mean, I don't know. I've never heard a talk on that, or it's not celebrated. And so I was afraid of that. I was afraid of like, what are people going to think? I guess I'm human, but I had to be okay with that. Either that, or we just couldn't come back to the DC area. So these were just a few of the things that really spoke to us. And I was also okay with not, being in ministry work. It was fine. If that didn't happen, it'd be okay, That and there was some other smaller boundary things that, my wife and I put in place. Not saying yes to everything, we had this little saying if somebody asked me to do something, I just had to wait 24 hours. I had to say thank you for the invite. It sounds great. I'm going to talk to my wife, and then can I answer you tomorrow? Which everybody says, sure, that's fine. And I'd realized, in the course of that 24 hours, that so many things were not in my gifting. They weren't in my, they just weren't things I should be involved with. They were the enemy of the great. They were good. They're fine. But
yeah.
All those came out of that time of being away for 4 months.
Wow. That's so amazing. And thank you for sharing, because to me, that journey, and Pete, I know you'd agree with this because you told me this before, but that part of your journey is the part of your journey that's led you to the healthy place that you live today. And I love that. And I know when we say that, we say we're striving to find greater health and greater rest. And I want to talk about that too, but I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind framing for us, because a lot of pastors are listening to this. And it's an interesting to get a perspective. You're not an outsider. You've grown up in ministry your whole life, and you ended up going back to the PGA Tour where you're a spiritual mentor and coach to a lot of the players. You travel around the world setting up golf communities. You are deeply rooted in advancing the kingdom of heaven forward using golf. But I'd love your advice. Maybe some of you pastors listening would love to hear your perspective on if you were to go back into ministry as a pastor, what would you do completely differently that would involve these rhythms of rest? How would you imagine that?
Yeah. And I think that's why you and I connected so much.
Yeah.
This exact thought right there, Shane, and again, I don't want to cast, blame back into those years of learning, I think. But I left that time in Florida. My main thing was like, how do I, the rest of my life, institute and integrate a sustainable pace of life?
Yeah.
A healthy, sustainable pace of life. What does the rhythm look like to do that? And so the answer is in some way fairly simple. It's like to obey his command of Sabbath. I mean, that's it. I mean, it's not a suggestion. It's to have a day to recalibrate, and I don't say like a yearly time to recalibrate, but like to really institute that is like not just a day to like collapse, a day. Hopefully we can get into a rhythm. And by the way, I'm speaking from a place of like process. In some ways, some of this is still very new to me.
Sure, right.
Even though that was 14 years ago. I've had some real highs and lows in this area. But I think particularly this last season, the last couple of years has been really felt strongly about this, that God gave us this gift, and we've just not received the gift. We've just not opened our hands to it. I haven't. And so I'm learning what that means to me from a freedom sense and from a gifting sense instead of a rule sense. That this is was one of the really difficult cruxes for me personally. It's like I had such a difficult time growing up, and it's still in me. It's still a part of my makeup. So part of that is it's just difficult to not. Even my wife goes, "Sounds like you're making up another rule for Sunday, Pete." And I go, "Don't say rule, guideline, a freedom sense." I'll tell you one funny thing that happened recently is, so we're here in my office at my house, so I'm on call 24/7 like a lot of you guys are.
Yeah.
And I just felt like, on Sundays, just this day, that door needs to be barred. I mean, literally barred. I cannot walk in this room. Okay. Even if it's to get like an office supply, I can't do it. Because as soon as I do, and I see this desk and I see
you start working,
the things that are on my mind, it just goes to the doing. It just goes. That's me. And so I have it as a guideline, but it's a freeing guideline. To me now, it's like, hey, I don't get to go in that room on this thing.
Right.
I don't have to. It's okay. It'll wait till tomorrow. It's okay.
Yeah.
So answering your question, I think that one thing in particular would be instituting not just a day off, but a real teaching understanding of like rest and Sabbath for your staff, and just guidelines. Like, hey, at 5 o'clock on Wednesdays, like, hey, we're shut here, man. You can't work here. Or just some guidelines that free people because we're doers, man. We're in this country, like we are doers, man, and we're celebrated. The more you can do, man, like that's healthy ministry work. The more you produce, the more these things are celebrated. So it doesn't is that message being given to people that are, you care about and work with, or pouring into their hearts so that they grow, right? These are just things I think, boy, that would have helped me.
Yeah.
And again, part of that's my own boundary issues. I probably could have done things differently, but that's one of my answers. But you pretty much
that's awesome. Yeah, I think it's so good. And as you're learning about Sabbath and rhythm of rest, man, we get to learn from you, and this has been super helpful. The last 14 years, you've been on a journey. You still are.
Yeah.
And learning to rest well. And they don't teach you that in seminary, did they? They didn't teach you.
Well, in any job. I'm sure the PGA isn't, the
PGA is not interested in rest.
Not, developing that in leaders either. So what you learned in one career, you're transferring into your life and into your other career, because you could work 7 days a week there too, I'm sure. So it's, I like what you said about blocking the door, because sometimes we need a physical presence so that our minds will just stop ourselves. Sometimes we have to physically, it's kind of like putting the remote away or shutting the phone completely off. There has to be a physical element, or we absolutely are going to keep going to do that thing, because there's always a reason to do it. It might be an important call, or somebody might have a need, or what if my kids need to get me, or, we have because it's so constant connectivity is so much a part of our culture that we can't imagine anymore what it's like to not be available 100% of the time. And I'm sure, like us, when we were kids, like we get on our bikes in the morning on a Saturday, we don't come home for the whole day. We're eating lunch at a friend's house, whatever. We're not calling home and checking in with mom. She doesn't know where we are or what we're doing. We drive right all over town. And
those were the days.
That's inconceivable now, though, because of and I don't think it's just because of danger. I think it's that we've conditioned ourselves to be accessible all the time. Yeah. And we don't realize the stress that puts on our physiology.
We carry one of these that we touch, according to statistics, over 2,200 times a day.
We touch our phones.
I'm curious as to how are you teaching some of these tour professionals and people as you mentor them and spiritually guide them?
Yeah, you're really helping them with their stress.
How are you helping them create not just a rhythm of training they understand, and rhythm of practice and all of that, and recovery from injuries and recovery for your body? Everybody gets that. But recovery for your soul, how are you helping people with that?
Well, that's a good question, because that particular group of people is very unique from the sense of, they work on the weekends.
Yeah, that's right.
Like us.
Just like pastors.
They're not working on the weekends. That's another problem.
That's true.
Yeah. That's payday. Sundays is payday. So the first thing that came to my mind is like my example to others, to my children. I feel like, unless I'm actually practicing some of these things, like I really need to just shut my mouth. Frankly, I've not been a very good example for a lot of years. So I'm kind of working on my own game here.
Yeah,
This,
yeah.
particularly the last couple of years, I'm really, and with my children, and I'm trying to, help them see. Like I just, the years of preaching to them or talk to them, it's mostly example. Like they know, speaking of the phone, like that was the first thing to go for me. That was the biggest thing on Sabbath, was like, that's got to go off.
Mhm.
And of course, if your kids want to call you, like you mentioned, Sue, or if you need to be getting in touch with or something, it takes a little while for people to learn that you're not available that day.
Yeah.
But once they do, like now, it's like my closest friends are like, "Oh, that's why you didn't respond."
Yeah. I'll
That's
talk
like,
to you
yeah,
Monday.
like I need a day off at this thing, you guys. You understand? And they're like, "I need a day off."
Yeah.
And I think so. To me, like that's like my example is like really important.
Wow.
And so I'm thinking about one particular player I've been mentoring, and we've just been talking about, like, what's a good rhythm for you? Is it 1 week off a month? If you're playing 3 weeks, like if you're going to do this the next 20 years, how does that work for you?
Mm-hmm.
And then how does it work on a week? And he's got a couple little kids. And so it's been interesting to see him like take like Wednesday afternoons off, just to recover and to rest and prep up for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday time, and to realize that's okay. Like I don't have, like everybody else. Yeah, 99% of the guys are grinding it out, trying to determine the speed of the greens and the type of shots they want to hit and honing their swings. It's just like, I think probably the greatest thing I can do is just have some time of rest here. He's one example. But and then there's the yearly rhythm, which I really think helps you go through those times when, I mean, we all have periods where 2 or 3 weeks go by and you just can't, you've committed to too much, or I've committed to too much, or there's something that I have to, I have a family vacation. I just can't do my normal optimal rhythm.
Right.
So, and they have the same thing. So I'm just working with them on understanding what I'm learning these days, what I'm working on, and then helping them integrate, places and times where they can just really be alone and receive from the King and just connect with him, so they know who they are, they know who he is, and they know who we are. So it's been interesting. That's a unique group of people. That's not the norm in this. But again, what is normal?
No, and I think it really shows to how needed these rhythms of rest are from everyone. And you mentioned something from that one particular example, the golfer, that I think is really important for all of us, which is, to work from a place of rest. We talk about that a lot, and we've learned that from other leaders who taught that to us. And, taking that day before as a day to find rest and restoration. And then what does your work look like out of that, rather than having to collapse at the end of your work week?
You rest before you work.
Yeah.
Rather than resting.
Yeah.
Not that you don't rest after, but you're strengthening yourself through rest before you work.
And like you said, Pete, this is hey, we're all on this journey together. The folks you're talking to right now, and including us, we are really striving in this area. And these lessons have been your transparency today, your openness to be able to share where you've made mistakes and where you found a crisis that led to more of a calling to rest. And I just have loved it and loved the conversation. I'm wondering how folks who are listening could connect with you, whether it be online or through Mulligan Ministry. through your ministry or through resources, or just to follow you in the journey and your ministry?
Yeah. Well, you can just email me. I love to converse with people. If one person watches this and wants to learn some things together, just you can send me an email. You can pass it along, or it's PM Hiskey, HISKEY @gmail.com. So yeah, I would love to converse about these kind of things. I really do like the dialogue, and I think you're right. Probably the scripture that's really meant the most to me this year on rest is like in Hebrews chapter 4, that we are to make every effort to enter the rest. And it sounds so diametrically opposed to we have to make effort to rest, but it requires intention to do this, to shift from a life of recovery and collapsing into like you said, Sue, like beginning the week out of strength and out of who I am and who he is, to begin that way. Like that's the order that God gave us, right? That's the first day of the week. It's the day in the scriptures begins in the evening. We start and rest, then we begin the day, versus how most of the time we think, well, the sunrise is new day, it's mercies new every morning.
Yeah.
But it takes a while. It takes effort to get into that, right? I mean, it takes intention, it takes time. It's just flipping the switch is it's just not easy,
Yeah.
So I would say that's probably one of my best lessons I've learned this last year. I have to make my wife and I have to make effort to enter the rest.
Work to enter the rest. I love that. Wow. Thank you, Pete.
That's so great.
So good. When's your next trip? Where are you headed next? Where are you taking Mulligan Ministry next?
So next week I'll go out to we will go out to our first event. It'll be at the tournament in Palm Springs. Can't even remember the name of the sponsor right now. I think it's American Express tournament at Palm Springs. So we'll be out there for a week, and then we'll go to a couple of tournaments down in Florida coming up. That's
amazing.
That's
so
hey, if you're listening, you just your envy for Pete just went up massively. But I know, Pete, you're going there to win hearts for Jesus. You're passionate for Jesus more than anything in life, and you're passionate about rest. So thank you for sharing these great lessons with all of us today. We'd love to pray for you. We do something a little different on our podcast. We pray for our guests. So if you're just listening for the first time, whatever you're doing, if you're watching this on YouTube, or you're driving down the road, listening to it on Spotify or a podcast app, would you just take a moment right now and pray for Pete, not just this upcoming trip, but his ministry and for him? Let's pray together. God, thank you for Pete. Thank you for the calling on his life. Thank you for his father who laid that foundation, his parents, and thank you for his family. And God, I pray, Lord, that this next trip, he would be able to come and minister from a place of rest. Lord, help him as he continues to strive and work. And Lord, be with all of us that we would implement these lessons today. God, I pray for many stories to come. People on the PGA Tour and around the world who are coming to Jesus and who are finding your rest through you. So we pray these. Fantastic to get some fresh perspective, wasn't it? Pete gave us a unique perspective, who understands ministry. He's been a pastor. He's also experienced the stress of those things. And now he's been on this journey to pursue rest. So good to hear from him.
I loved what he said about rhythms. We've been talking about this ourselves. Establishing new rhythms in the new year. Everybody's motivated to have a sustainable pace of life.
Yeah.
Which Pete talked about. And what struck me about the rhythms was he brought out himself as an example. Like healthy rhythms are learned. He's mentoring his family and his clients just by establishing rhythms for himself And I think we tend to be a little too action oriented on our rhythm establishing. Like, okay, this is a new thing. This is my new job. I'm going to do life like this. And everything has a box. And I'm going to create this new pattern.
Yeah, and I think the modeling of that really hit me too, because, well, honestly, because I haven't done it. You know, I look at it, we have 3 boys who are all young adults now, and, you know, they're all hard workers, and they got that from me. They got that from us. We're hard workers.
Thank you.
Not just me, but I'm pretty notorious. I'm a notorious hard worker, and to a bad point.
People don't realize that what I do around the house is hard work. That's the problem.
This isn't a comparison. I was not commenting on the comparison of work.
It seems
I was
like
actually saying that you haven't abused it as much as I have, and
I don't know if that's true, but okay.
And
we're all hard workers.
We're all hard workers. Everyone's tired. We're all tired. But what are we modeling? You know, and that's just what I asked myself. You know, we want hard workers.
We tell them how we want them to behave, but then
we tell them all the time how we want them to
different.
work hard. But do we tell them how we want them to rest well?
And how to rest.
And how to rest. That was really convicting for me.
Yeah. What struck me is that healthy rhythms, establishing healthy rhythms, is not a resolution.
Yeah.
It's a habit, and a habit only happens because you're doing it regularly, without the fanfare, without somebody requiring it. You know, nobody's making him close his door on once a week so that he stops working. He's putting those parameters around himself. And that's what a habit is I'm deciding this is where it stops, and I hold myself to it. And I think that's the difference between that and a resolution. It's why it's harder. And we have to keep doing it so that it becomes a rhythm. And then it gets easier.
Well, I am so convicted myself, and maybe you are as well in listening to this. In fact, I want to end with the passage that he brought out to. I looked it up just now, and we haven't seen this, that Hebrews 4, the whole setup of it is about rest.
Yeah.
And about obeying the Sabbath that God has established. And then ultimately, I think, the author makes application to our permanent rest one day. But the words that Pete quoted, Hebrews 4, to work to rest, it's actually in NIV, and I looked it up in the New Living Translation. Here's what it says, just for all of us as we close today. Hebrews 4:10. For all who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating the world. So let us do our best to enter that rest. But if we disobey God, as the people of Israel did, we will fall. And then he goes into that famous passage of, for the word of God is alive and powerful. It's sharper than the two-edged sword, and cuts between soul and spirit and joint and marrow, and exposes our innermost thoughts and desires, and then closes with rest again. So as we close today, let's do our best to enter God's rest. So whatever you're doing this week, make sure you've built in, guarded a rhythm of rest, not just because it's healthy, but because it's obedient. So as always, thanks for joining us on Stress Test. We'd love for you to go with us on the journey, and subscribe on YouTube or any of the streaming platforms to listen to this. We'd love to add you to our mailing list as well that keeps a great newsletter. Sue, you do a great newsletter and keeps us, not just in that newsletter, by the way, there's some really healthy
resources and
just some great stuff that she's going to put in there. So text the word stress to 833-204-2158. That's 833-204-2158. And it'll prompt you a few times to give us some of your information. We'd love to have you go with us. God bless.